3, 2, 1.
So, today, I'm going to be challenging the assumption that the death penalty is morally right, financially cheaper than incarcerating death row inmates, and that the death penalty lowers crime rates. My belief that the death penalty deters crime is changed because of the research that I've done into deterrence. Everyone seems to think that, at least that I've talked to about the death penalty outside of this classroom, seems to think that because I'm a theater kid and because I am all about the arts and I am by default somehow left-winged because of that, I am biased and believing killing is wrong, that I somehow am not looking out for my fellow man's safety in some way, shape, or form, and I'm not considering the other side so much. That is false. So imagine with me for a second that you're just hanging out with some friends, night out, you're downtown, it's a Friday night. Someone offers you a drink, some alcohol. Now, you know your family history, and you know there's a past there riddled with addiction. But you figure you're different, or better somehow. For whatever reason, you believe those things won't happen to you, or maybe you don't care. Maybe you want to numb some kind of pain, any kind. So you drink it. Next thing you know, you're going out for a drink every other week, and it's every week, and it's every day. Next thing you know, soon enough you're buying them by the can to store at home in your garage or fridge. Before you know it, you've fallen into the same thing as your parents before you and your grandparents before them. You've become addicted. You've no idea how to stop. But at the time, it seemed like an easy answer to the proposition to drink in the first place. Death is the easy answer some like to look for to a lot of our society's problems today, especially when it comes to the crime of murder. It always seems easier to do what is convenient, to do the thing that feels the best in the moment. Instant gratification is what that's called, and it's a nice road to take to regret. You build a chemical button in your brain that releases endorphins, and the more you are instantly gratified, the more you smash on that button, the harder it becomes to stop using it. The point I'm trying to make here is that just because something is easier does not mean it is right. American society is addicted to violence and death. It is normalized not only as a reality of life, but oftentimes as a form of entertainment in the form of documentaries, films, plays even that I've been in. It's normalized, romanticized, glorified. It's become an entertainment cash grab in a lot of ways. It's a part of the culture of violence we see in action throughout the country, whether it be hate crimes, mass shootings, or bombings home and abroad. As a society and a nation, we are addicted to death. The death penalty has been a topic of debate, really dry mouth, topic of debate since the Furman versus Georgia case in 1972, where the Supreme Court ruled that the imposition and carrying out of the death penalty constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. Thus, capital punishment was deemed unconstitutional under the 8th Amendment. Under that ruling, that's my phone. Until that ruling was overturned in 1976, that is. And we see this happen many, many times throughout history with like a 3-year difference. It's overturned and then turned back and overturned and turned back, and then sometimes the Supreme Court goes into a moratorium state where it's banned for a certain specific reason or outbreak or something. For decades, the United States has been playing political and moral hot potato with the death penalty, sending the law to either side of the political spectrum several times throughout the years. Yet, in all that time, we've yet to thoroughly and deeply discuss the root of the issue. It is my belief in human nature that humans seek the fastest end to a threat. It is base instinct to neutralize a threat as quickly as possible. The longer an active threat remains, the more uncomfortable we become, the more endangered we feel. Examples of this are littered throughout history with the war on drugs, the Red Scare, the Cold War, the Great Awakening, threats of damnation from the church, all instances of fear being utilized to motivate people. So it only makes sense that if our country or state courts find a man guilty of a crime like murder, we would seek to end the perceived threat this person represents. Shoot first, ask questions later, kind of deal. And so often in these cases do we only later discover we should have asked more questions. But even more than that, we give in to our emotions when these people society deems a threat have already shown us they are one. According to Gallup, Huffington Post, March 2017, 60% penalty supporters support the death penalty because they wish to satisfy their need for vengeance or retribution, emotions that these people have every right to feel. But what happens when we place an innocent man in the shoes of this murderer? What then? In 1992, from Avo Stories Eric, Murder, Crime, Rights, May 2010, Cameron Todd Willingham was convicted of arson murder in Texas. He was believed to have set fire to his home, burning his 3 children alive. In 2024, he was put to death. Later, it was discovered that evidence had been misinterpreted, and the Texas forensic team concluded that, in fact, not a single bit of the evidence gathered against Cameron was valid. Little comfort to Cameron, kind of late on that. And they even had 12 years in between 1992 and 2004 to figure it out before his death. I cannot imagine dying thinking history says I murdered my own children. Then we have Carlos de Luna, who in 1989 was executed for stabbing a store clerk. 20 years later, the Chicago Tribune, not the police department whose job it is to investigate these things, discovered evidence indicating de Luna was innocent and that a man named Carlos Hernandez, who confessed to the crime several times throughout de Luna's trial, was in fact the murderer. In situations of murder of any kind, it can be difficult to maintain reason. It is easier to accept things at face value with no benefit of doubt. When emotions like vengeance and hate are involved, it also becomes easy to let ourselves be consumed by it. But that does not mean we don't have a say in the matter. The choice is ours whether to put the bottle down, even if just to consider more deeply and more thoroughly what exactly is happening here, before we make a decision that we may regret later. At the end of the day, the death penalty is an enabling device to feed America's addiction to death. It is not financially sound. Like any addiction, it wastes money on deadly chemicals used in execution or the expensive isolation units that hold death row inmates. As shown in this study done by the Death Penalty Information Center on the costs of the death penalty in 2017 over life in prison, shows that upon review of 15 state reports between the year 2000 and 2017, seeking the death penalty in a case costs on average $700,000 more in case level costs than those that do not seek the death penalty. Even some of the more extreme capital cases on a federal level can cost up to $110,000. This is the price of the trials and proceedings of the trials alone. Someone argued, well, okay, Anthony, maybe some innocents slip through the cracks, and maybe it is a costly form of punishment. But doesn't the death penalty deter crime as well? If nothing else, it keeps others from following in the footsteps of other murderers. I mean, just look at the studies conducted by Professor Hashim Dazbak using state-level panel data from 1960 to 2000. The professor was able to compare the relationship between executions and murder incidents before, during, and after the Supreme Court's moratorium. Hashim found that executions had a slightly higher negative relationship with murder rates. To this I would respond that as a question that is crazy specific. And while that study is accurate for its time, we are 19 years past the year 2000 and things have changed. According to the Washington Post study of deterrence on April 30th, 2014, their research suggests that most criminals are concerned with getting caught, not what might happen to them afterward. It's the certainty of apprehension that's been demonstrated consistently to be an effective deterrent, not the severity of the ensuing consequences. That is a quote from Daniel Negan, a professor on criminal justice from Carnegie Mellon University. The things running through a person's mind when contemplating murder tends to be the most immediate threat, because if you're not caught, then you have no reason to be uncomfortable or to feel endangered, at least not for the moment, right? Why look to the consequences if you never have to face them anyways? However, in the end, we all must face the consequences. If there's one thing I've learned in the last 3 months of researching and studying this topic, it is that at the end of the day, the victims, one way or another, end up regretting or wishing they had not pushed for death. The suffering doesn't just disappear. It lingers and numbs and gnaws at you. I've read this in letters to the editor. I've seen this in art. I've seen this on national television. I've read this in quotes from several court documents from many different cases spanning back to 1815. Why? Because they don't get any closure. They can't give any forgiveness. They can't ask why they did it. They can't heal. All that is wrought is more death. If we claim the right to take away lives, why do we deny others the right to give life back in a situation born of a choice they made when not necessarily in a clear state of mind? Maybe even similar to the state of mind the murderer was in the first place. If we do not take the time to question these things, yet balance these questions with action, if we do not act, then we become bystanders. And sometimes that's worse. We need to call our state senators, district representatives, city council members, petition them, email them, send them handwritten letters, tell them why you care. Speak up. Don't give in to our society of fear and violence because it is easier, because it is normalized. We can end the addiction to death. We can put the bottle down. We have the power to choose life or death. Our hands may not be the best to hold that power, but they are still our own. Which do you choose?
Great work. Questions, comments?
Yeah, I think one thing, okay, you mentioned that there's always been two sides of this argument, and we've gone great lengths on both sides to try and cap the issue, right? I think that, I mean, would you agree that just everything that we know about it just needs to die, you know?
How do you mean?
We need fresh perspective. There's a lot of young people, you and me, and there's a lot of people that, I'm young, I'm almost 30, but it's like we need to learn a different viewpoint on everything.
Yeah.
It's like these arguments are becoming so stagnant. It's like your argument and the argument that precedes it. I mean, it's like we're getting to the point where everyone has said the thing.
I mean, I referenced the decade-old argument in the United States, but really it goes further back than that. I mean, it goes straight back to Harambe's law thousands of years ago with the code of law. He made the first written law, an eye for an eye, the idea of vengeance and getting back what's yours, and you know.
And I think that we fail to see the emotional triggers that spark a lot of these decisions, and that happens behind closed doors in a lot of people. I think most people are willing to share their own truth.
For sure, for sure. And the thing about this 1,000-year-old issue is that because it has so much history behind it and so much conversation, it's hard to dismantle that in the way you're talking about.
Absolutely.
It is difficult to move through that muck, and I would argue that the only perspective we've really yet to deeply explore in the way that we have either other side is the murderers. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about like the way we deal with Ted Bundy and his tapes, the way we deal with, I'm talking about like, is it better to be born good or to overcome your nature through great effort? If you choose to be born good, as some people might, what do you learn? You don't, it's the same as anybody else who's been good. It's not the same as someone who's wronged and then learn from that.
Absolutely. If we can teach these people to learn to become great teachers, that asset, I think, I mean, that's a population that's untapped. Like
the greatest teacher is failure, and what's worse than failing your fellow man when you kill somebody?
As you were talking and making drawing the analogy of society being intoxicated by violence and by death, I'm reminded of the Kurt Vonnegut quote. And he was speaking to future generations, and it was an apology. He says, "Please forgive us, we were rolling drunk on petroleum," right? And I think that still lasts. But that's what was going through my mind as I was listening to you, is that as Americans, you know, and globally even, we are rolling drunk on violence.
Oh, we need that.
No, I mean, how do you think the rest of the world
It's
sees us?
insatiable. Yeah.
I think that's important too, the way that you simplify these giant bottles of crap, and you know what I mean, we are.
Yeah.
I mean,
Because
I
that's
was just
something-
talking to him earlier about watching more videos.
I mean, that's the thing about America too, is it's another big issue we have here is addiction. So it only makes sense to compare the two, and I mean, it really isn't that different. Addiction doesn't have to be chemical. It doesn't have to be in any specific form. It can be psychological, it can be mental, it can be emotional. Addiction is addiction as long as you're pressing that button that releases the endorphins, that gives you the euphoric whatever, it is addictive.
All right. Thank you very much. That was wonderful.